motion brought to Council from the Licensing and Standards Committee could have directed an immediate injunction application to try to shut down Uber, a timing that Council was advised would significantly reduce our chances of success. Our professional advisors have been clear that the City should seek an injunction when it is inappropriate and when it is in our best interests. To do so when we have a good chance of winning, our best chance for success. That is a matter of objective, professional, legal judgment. Starting the months-long process of pursuing an injunction now may, for example, delay dozens of ongoing charges before the courts and would also force City staff to stop working on new bylaws that are long overdue, bylaws which will create a regulatory framework that is fair to all parties. The present situation is not fair to taxi drivers in particular. I've always been clear that I believe bringing Uber under regulation, which provide fairness and equity for all, regulations that do that, is the best course of action. And I believe City Council has an opportunity to finally address the outdated system here in Toronto by listening to the advice of City staff. That is why I put forward an amendment to the motion today, directing the City Solicitor and Executive Director of Municipal Licensing and Standards to seek an injunction under the appropriate circumstances. When they tell us this injunction should be pursued in the manner and on the time frame which is based on their objective professional judgment, I think we are all wise to listen to that advice. I believe legal action should be taken when the City's lawyer and professional staff believe it's appropriate and when we can be successful. And I want our Municipal Licensing and Standards staff, under the leadership of Tracy Cook, to continue developing regulations that will modernize the ground transportation industry and to continue their considerable law enforcement activities at the same time. These changes are long overdue, and I am constantly seeking ways to advance the timetable. But the real challenge is to do this both as quickly as possible and to do it right. And doing it right means fair, equitable rules which protect our drivers and their livelihoods and provide the people of Toronto at the same time with reliable, affordable, and safe options to move around our city. So I'll stop there and see if you have questions.
But tell us why. Why do you have such a strong feeling that you won't be successful?
Well, I'm in the awkward position where we receive legal advice, which, of course, if we were to go through it all in public and put it all over the media, is telling our opponents some of the weaknesses of our own case and some of the strengths of our own case, and that's not something you're wise to do, and that's why we had that discussion in camera. But I can only say to you that our professional advice received from our lawyers and from our regulators was to the effect that we were not going to have the best chance of being successful in an injunction brought at this time, and that there were other considerations that will change with time passing that will likely alter that, and that we will then see where we sit at that time.
Leaders within the taxi industry, once again, aside from the disruption that took place in the chamber, have stepped forward and said, we believe in council wanting to perhaps pursue this a little further, but you're very direct in criticizing yourself and saying that this was an attempt to delay things.
You know, it's interesting because you sort of get, you know, put in a box no matter what you do or what you say. But just to take, for example, the process of developing the new regulations. Guess what's going on right now? What is going on right now in that process is the process of consulting the industry, including the first 2 meetings held this week with members of the taxi cab industry. That is consultation we are wise to undertake because we will get a better regulation if we talk to the people affected by it, but it is also a step that we are required to take by law. If we didn't properly consult the members of the industry, which takes time, then there's a good chance that the bylaws we come forward with, even if passed, could be overturned by a court. And so they're critical of that. They would be harshly critical, I would expect, if we brought an injunction application and it was unsuccessful. And that later on in all the analysis after the fact, when we went forward the second time and were unsuccessful in obtaining an injunction, that you know, they would be critical of us for mismanaging that file in some fashion or other. In this case, to be clear, I believe the best course of action we can follow is first, when you have an injunction application, to make sure it's successful, and the best way to try to produce that result is to listen to the best advice you can get from our professional, objective advisors, our lawyers and our regulators, and that is what we have done today.
But for the next 5 months or so, just based on what we heard on the floor of council, before, if city staff should act on your motion and go forward with this, it's status quo until the summer before I actually take considerable issue with that, and let me tell you why.
What is going to happen over the next several months are the following things in no particular order. Enforcement activities will continue. Court cases will be prosecuted, as you said today. Some of them this month, some next month, and those court cases will continue, and I suspect there may be more of them. The bylaw drafting activity and the presentation of that draft bylaw to the members of City Council will happen during that period of time. And there is nothing that says that the decision on timing, that our officials and advisors wouldn't come forward at some point during that time, after or any time, to say now is the best time. But again, they are the ones best positioned to understand the coming together of all these different things, the enforcement, the bylaw drafting, the state of the law.
To be specific on my question, Anna Kinstowski said on the floor, like, in banking council, this is not the kind of thing you just pivot on, walk over to the courthouse and we have an injunction. But she said that before this would even be considered, even if, let's say, best case scenario for those seeking an injunction, staff said next week. I mean, it would still be the status quo. What we have in place today would still be in place for a number of months. Early spring was, I think, what you talked about.
I think a lot of what goes on here, actually, and I regret this very much, because I think people who are legitimately suffering are sometimes led to have false expectations about what even an injunction application could produce by way of timing. And the fact is, the city solicitor and any other lawyer will tell you that when you make an injunction application, first of all, of course, you want to have some degree of assurance you're going to be successful. And there was a lot of discussion about that today. But secondly, just the practical realities of seeking an injunction application require you to have to pull together all the information that goes in an affidavit, a lot of that having to do with the enforcement of the law and how that has gone. Secondly, there has to be cross-examination on those affidavits, and the other side gets to put forward their evidence at the same time. And thirdly, you then have to go to the court and ask them for a date. And I think you heard the city solicitor say today that the last time we went forward and asked for a date and even asked them to make it urgent, I think we got a date 2 months later. So we are talking about several months here if we started today. And so I'm not saying that doesn't mean you don't start today or any other day. I'm just saying that I hope people understand that those who try and create the expectation that we could be in court tomorrow morning doing anything about this, if that's what somebody advised us to do, are creating false expectations. And I think that's very cruel to people who are legitimately suffering and who are looking for some help.
Is your understanding of this motion that city staff, on their discretion and timing, could now pursue an injunction? Or do they have to come back to council and say, our advice is this is the time, and council then has to decide?
I think you heard, and you get mixed up as to which series of questions were answered in camera and which weren't, but I think you heard a question asked in public today. Do you have, under, I think it's Section 380 of the City of Toronto Act, the discretion or the authority now to go and seek an injunction? And the answer that came back was yes. And I think what you're going to find them do is to continue the work that they're doing on all fronts, regulatory preparation, law enforcement, and that they will, accept this direction from council to proceed with this injunction application when circumstances are appropriate. And I think a lot of that has to do with when we can be successful.
But if they always have this authority, what was the point? If they always have this authority, what was the point of what happened today?
Well, I didn't move the motion originally. I mean, the motion was moved and approved by the Licensing and Standards Committee. It came to City Council, and what I did by moving the amendment that I did was try to move an amendment that I thought was sensible within the context of the professional advice we had received, and that really, again, maximized our chances for success. I can't imagine what these questions would be like here with you and with the taxi industry and others if we went forward at a time that was not optimal and sought an injunction and lost again. And it also weakens our position as a city to have gone forward and lost twice. And so, again, that's what we're focused on here, which is the professional advice we received, which unfortunately I can't and shouldn't share with you in full, but also the ultimate objective we have, which is when we go forward with an injunction application, it will be one that we're going to win. And we're going to win it so that then it sends that message that we want to send.
That's where you're saying win. Is there an if situation here? I mean, you mentioned one example is when the new regulations are in place. I mean, is that, for you, dependent on that? If Uber follows those new regulations, you wouldn't?
I'm not going to get into all kinds of hypotheticals, but I did say this, and I'll repeat it. If we pass regulations, let's say it happens in that order, that we continue to enforce the law, and then that the new regulations are passed and Uber chooses to thumb its nose at those regulations, I can assure you I will be among those, again, subject to the advice of our advisors, our solicitors, and others on our success. press saying that I think we should be, going forward to try and seek an injunction very quickly at that time, because we will have brought forward regulations that are resulting from an extensive consultative process, trying to be fair and trying to create that level playing field we've talked about, and that one party or another, whether it's Uber or anybody else, if they've chosen to ignore those, I think that's something that we obviously have to consider at that time.
But if they don't ignore, I mean, like in Edmonton, for example, is your hope that you come up with regulations that can bring Uber into the fold, and then Uber says, if this is fantastic,
May I repeat something that I hope that people have understood about the approach I'm taking, because there are various people that try and characterize my approach in different ways. The objective is, always was, and will continue to be, to produce a set of fair and equitable regulations that bring Uber into regulation. No question about that. Have them conform to fair safety, insurance, and other kinds of standards like that. I think that will result in some reduction in regulation for the cab industry, but that remains to be seen what's brought forward to us. I believe that will be, and that the traveling public have choice and safety in the ground transportation industry, and that's the objective. And if we can produce collectively a regulation that does that, and people abide by it, and people believe it is fair and equitable, I think we will have done this the right way and achieved the right result. And Edmonton, I think they believe they've done that, but I guess it remains to be seen.
And in that situation, there would be no need for an injunction.
You
keep saying when.
We're into all this hypothetical stuff, but I would think if we have a regulation people are respecting and people think of as fair and equitable and providing a choice that people want, that people will be as satisfied as they're ever going to be. The actual draft work that's been done is now taken for consultation that is happening as we speak. There were 2 meetings this week, as I say already, with the cab industry on that. And so I would say that it looks like in terms of process, they followed the kind of process that you'd prefer to see here, which is that they have listened to all sides, put forward a bylaw that brings Uber under regulation, keeps the taxi industry under regulation. Hopefully, I think they would believe that they've created something that is fair and equitable. I can't really comment on that. And they're going forward to see how it works.
But it seems like you want to take the Edmonton approach, but instead you're
No.
taking the Calgary approach.
No, I said we want to take an approach like that in terms of process. And as for substance, it remains to be seen what Tracy Cook and her staff recommend to us in terms of the content of that bylaw. Natalie was
I
next.
just wanted to be clear on the intent of your wording on that motion, because everyone is declaring, for all the councillors at least, just are declaring victory with this vote. Some of them are saying that the way your motion is worded suggests that there is a clear message to Uber that an injunction is coming. Was that the intent of your wording here, or are they misconstruing that?
Let's be clear. What the motion says is it directs the city staff to pursue an injunction, but it says that it should be done when circumstances are appropriate. And I've tried to explain as best I can within the constraints I face on our legal advice to say that, among other things, that is when we think we can be successful. And it is also taken in the context of all these other things that are going on, law enforcement, regulatory drafting, and so on. But a lot of it has to do with when we think we can win. What is the point of going to court? Other than for those who wish to do political grandstanding, what is the point of going to court and losing? And I think that will dash the hopes of these people worse than anything else we could do. I think what we can do is do what we're doing. Enforce the law through charges being laid and taken through the courts, continue work on drafting the regulations, and have our staff directed to pursue an injunction when circumstances are appropriate within all of that context.
You would like to see an injunction, but your hands are tied based on the court.
I'm not saying that. I think that the wording, I've explained it as best I can, and I think it speaks for itself in the context of saying that they're directed to pursue an injunction when circumstances are appropriate. But we're leaving, that decision to a series of considerations that we think they can advise us on.
Mayor Tory just
Yes,
spoke to some of
moment.
the cab drivers about the vote today, whether that satisfies them, but they say that they're going to meet on the 7th to decide whether they're still going to do their strike during All-Star Weekend next weekend. Sounds like it's still on the table for them.
I hope not, because, again, I think by some of the way that these things happen and some of the false expectations that are created, I think it really does a disservice to people who I've acknowledged many, many times are suffering. And I think that, I believe that any objective examination would say that we're going about this as quickly as possible, and we're going about it based on the best professional advice that we can receive. And that I think demonstrations, whether inside the City Council building or out on the streets, don't advance that timetable. they probably do nothing more than further create more frustration because people think, well, we've demonstrated and still nothing happened. If that report can come forward in March, for example, with the draft bylaw, I will be pushing every hour of every day to see if it can be. They're proceeding ahead with the law enforcement. I think they're doing everything they can in the circumstances to try to address this issue as quickly as possible. And I just hope that a calmer situation can prevail here, because the alternative that we saw a little bit of today and which we've seen on the streets, it doesn't advance the timetable. It doesn't advance the interests of a single cab driver. And I'm trying to help advance their interests and the interests of the public, most importantly, in terms of knowing that they can be safe, that the regulations that govern this are fair, and that they have choice in their choice of ground transportation.
So we really don't seem to
That's-
believe that.
that-
They seem to clearly not believe.
There-
Last question.
There's a lot of, you know what?